video, I want to set you up for discussion for it. This will be about marriage. Now, in general, there is a trend in the Middle Renaissance for portraits, single paintings, panel paintings of that are selfies essentially. And this trend happens in society in the main in the Middle Renaissance because there is, post Black Death, a greater sense of man's agency in the world, their ability to create their own fate. It's no longer just destined by God, as one would think of in the Middle Ages, but rather a person has the ability to craft his own future. There are lots more diaries being written, and again, people are looking back to the ancients, the ancient Greeks and Romans, because it was thought that there was a sense of individualism there that that these people of the Middle Renaissance could hook into. In any event, so portraits are just a new phenomena in the Middle Renaissance, and a portrait meaning a single panel as opposed to like that inserting of a patron portrait within a larger work. Okay, so but sometimes these portraits are being used for marriage, the making of a marriage. So someone would put up a portrait of themselves and send to a potential mate for approval. Now, in elite society, and that's kind of what we're working with here, anybody who can afford to have their portrait made, marriages were arranged by one's parents. There's a lot of talk about love in the literature of this age, but to be honest, marriages are still arranged. The men are much older than the women, and women can be married, so maybe a typical match would be a man in, his mid-30s and a woman still in her teens, late teens. So in any event, this is to arrange those marriages, often these between wealthy families. They were often political or financial alliances. These portraits had to be exchanged. You should also know that women were cloistered essentially in the house, in the palaces. Again, we're talking elite society, and were very rarely let out unchaperoned. Now, I'm showing you a not very interesting portrait, but to make a point that the first portraits in here, obviously of a man, were done in profile. And so we're talking about 1440, 1450. And the reason why they're in profile is because this was, again, learned from the ancient Romans, ancient Greeks and Romans, that, the best portraits were done on coins. That's what they had the most available, the Renaissance had available for them to see, and so they worked with that trend. However, the portrait turned after time, so by the time we hit the 1450s, 1460s, we have the figure turning 3/4 and then eventually full frontal. Here's a young man, interestingly, who's showing himself as quite lovely. But also showing us that he has allegiance to the guy who is portrayed a la Antica in the Roman form in the medallion here, and that is Cosimo de' Medici. Medici we'll talk about in the next module. Portraits get done in stone too. This is a portrait bust, it's called. It's out of marble. Very, very common. Again, a trend borrowed from the ancient Romans. In this case, also borrowed from the ancient Romans, this idea that you put yourself in armor. I'm sure this guy was a soldier, but wearing an armor that is reminiscent more of antique armor than perhaps what was worn in Renaissance warfare. And another portrait bust here. Again, they're aiming for naturalism, cutting out the eyeballs, the pupil in the way that the ancient Romans did. Now, when it comes to women, we have the same sorts of trends, although the turning of the figure from the profile into the full frontal, as in the Mona Lisa, that happens a little more slowly than it does in the men. But portraits of marriage age women we see a lot of, or enough of, in the Renaissance. And it gives us some sense of, and again, these are, these are like Tinder material today. Gives us some sense of fashion trends. So we'll just lay them out here, and you'll probably, now that I tell you, you'll probably see them everywhere. The women of Florence, in any event, had blonde hair. Yes, there were manuals out there how to bleach your hair. Um, they liked extensions, ribbons, interweavings of pearls here. This was really hot hair pieces. They liked high foreheads, so they plucked their crown up here. You'll see a lot of high foreheads and slight eyebrows, sometimes no eyebrows. And again, if you think of the Mona Lisa, that was just a fashion trend. Um, Often jewelry was featured, not so much here, although we got pearls in the hair. And the dress. Now, I don't have a lot to say in this short video that I'm showing you about dress, although I do know that the cloth industry, it was huge in Italy. They were getting raw materials and from other places and then weaving them up. And Florence in particular was a center for the cloth industry. So anyway, here's a woman whose portrait is being sent out to potential suitors. Again, just this idea that eventually the figure starts to turn in space, but a little bit later, maybe about 1470, 1480, and then by 1480 you get maybe a full frontal. Again, all the things I mentioned in the other images. Sometimes the background is meaningful. Sometimes that suggests to a potential suitor that she's coming with property of a certain kind. Or other times it might be read more abstractly, more iconographically, like, you know, her virtue is fortified or something. I don't know. I don't know how to read this painting actually. One more here. Again, jewelry. Often jewelry is very specific to a family. And so you'll get it depicted on the woman, and then, again, on the shelf behind her. Other things here, women were expected to read. Elite women were expected to read in this age, so they could read the Bible. They were not taught to write. Write is an act of independence, an act of free thought. Again, you read what other people say, particularly what the Bible has to say, but you do not write. So reading material here. And these are not rosaries, but birthing belts. So the suggestion here is this woman is on the market. She has certain skills, she's got certain wealth, and she's just dying to have babies. You would drape this across your belly while you were having children. And another woman, same idea here. I'll let you stop, and there's the belt and other things. I'll let you stop and unpack that image. Finding suitable mates for women was for marriage-age daughters was so prevalent in the latter part of the Middle Renaissance that some families here, the Tornabuoni family hired this painter to do a series of paintings in a chapel, and here's one of them. It's the birth of John the Baptist. There's John the Baptist's mom, there's the child itself, and right smack dab in the middle is the portrait of the marriage age Tornabuoni child, and her the married women always cover their hair, the married women of the family. So in any event, right out there in a public space, in a church, selling of the daughters. Interest in portraits of kids at this time is also through the roof. You have some portrait busts of children, and sometimes they're done not just in stone, as we saw in the last time, but in terracotta. This Andrea della Robbia, maybe some of you have heard of this phrase, the della Robbia ware. It's painted ceramics. It's lovely white and lots of bright colors. But in any event, as famous as any of the sculptors who work in bronze or stone. And in any event, another portrait. We see this lovely painting showing a grandfather and a child. The reason why children are so, again, post-Black Death, children are commodities in a marriage. We got to get up that birth rate, and so children are seen as commodities, as valuable to the family's continuance. And again, right out there in the public, this is by that same painter, this time for another family, the Sassetti family. This is Mr. Sassetti here, and there is his son in attendance as patrons of a religious scene. It's St. Francis here in front of the Pope getting the okay to be the Franciscan order. So again, children now show up creeping up in these patron roles. And Sassetti actually worked for the Medici. So here's a guy with the darkest hair is Lorenzo de' Medici, and his children and nephews actually are here in the foreground. So it's kind of a strange way to sneak portraits into a religious scene, but the idea that you're sneaking in children is so part of the Middle Renaissance. Just a bit more generic information. I don't expect you to remember any of those works of art, just this general idea about reproduction and marriage and all that. Aside from birthing belts, there are birthing plates. So these are sometimes wooden, these two are wooden, and sometimes ceramic, terracotta plates that are done up for the birth of a child. They have all kinds of strange, like in this next 2 minutes, I can't even tell you the kinds of strange imagery that appears on them, but sometimes they have to do with the act of birthing, as we see right here. Sometimes about the triumph of love. This could use a lot of unpacking. Sometimes famous births, as shown here, and famous children in their cribs. This is Hercules, who in his crib strangles a snake, and then the labors of Hercules are around the edge. And sometimes, who knows? Sometimes these birthing plates have just like moments of impregnation. Did I say that right? Moments of becoming, moments that precede the moment in which a woman becomes pregnant. Sorry. And let me stop the video there. This is Apollo and Daphne. He is pursuing her. And according to some stories, she does become pregnant after he catches her.